want to thank you for coming back to Something Wicked Film Festival. And for everyone out there who's going to be watching this afterwards, just please tell us your name, your film, and what you did on your film to get everything started.
I'm a Penaz Eisner. My film's called Lairs, and I did literally everything except for write the poem that it's based on, which is a poem that my mom wrote because my mom's a poet, and I always read her poems basically when they get published, and also a lot of the time she lets me basically look at them before they get published, and I give her feedback and that kind of thing, and it's always a really interesting process to engage with that work basically. And I mean, I'm really interested in writing and stuff myself, but it's kind of always been a hobby in a way to make less structured art that I don't have to actively, plan every 2 seconds of beforehand, like a complete insane person, which is what I have to do with films, so that's it's just kind of a thing that complements the other stuff. But I mean, my mom is a really brilliant poet, and this poem Lairs is basically about a couple whose love just absolutely like rots away and basically completely goes to hell. It's not about my parents. Like, I always want to clarify that to people. They have a really nice relationship. And it's a really good poem, and it's really authentic. And I kind of noticed when I read it, I was like, the male and female characters basically both function in it as kind of like masculine and feminine archetypes, basically, in an almost Jungian way, which I think is cool. And I basically was kind of jumping off of that and jumping off of some of the descriptions she had in there of these plants that are basically disturbing looking in nature, and they represent this dying relationship, et cetera, et cetera. I thought that was a really cool metaphor. I thought the metaphor of the garden, of the house representing the relationship between the people, was really interesting. And I thought those things were kind of inherently visual in their nature. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, when you, obviously, if you adapt a book theoretically to a film, you would adapt it, you would directly translate it. And I know a lot of people make poetry films, and a lot of people make films that I feel like are films that accompany the poetry. Basically, the poetry is kind of a standalone work still that's functional by itself, and then the film kind of complements that. And that was kind of not what I wanted to do. And I've made one poetry. I made one poetry film before from one of my mom's films, and I've made one based on one of my films, which is like, to an extent, the one that I made is different because it's kind of two integrated ideas. It's basically a story but experimental, so that's different. But these ones that I've made of my mom's poems, I feel like have both tried, and this one has succeeded much more because I was a lot younger when I made the other one, to adapt it actively into a third new thing, basically. Yeah, the film is a new thing. It's not just two coupled things. It's not the film coupled with the poem. It's a new thing in of itself that's born out of the idea of the film and the poem. So I think that that's kind of what I was going for with this. Okay. Sorry, I forgot the question. I don't think I was answering it. I was just talking.
That is perfectly fine, because essentially my question would have been, tell me a little bit about the film, and that's exactly what you did anyway. That's why I let you keep going. You're essentially telling us exactly what your film is, which is fine. That's exactly what we need to know. What I would like to know also is, because this is an adaptation of one of your mom's films, what was the inspiration for doing that instead of doing something else? I'm trying to remember. Have I seen your other film that was based on your mom's poem? What was that one called?
It's called The Long Night. It's from, I want to say, I can't remember what year I made it in, because honestly, it all kind of melts together to an extent, because I literally feel the same mentally as I felt since I was 3 or something like that. Like, not, that came out wrong. I don't mean that I think I'm not like actively as stupid and have no object permanence or anything, but like I just feel like the same person. And so my attitude towards making these films, when I was making them, I remember what it was like to make all of them, and I've sort of felt always the same sort of level of engagement in the same way, and sort of like I have a hard time remembering it. It's kind of interesting, like in terms of where they fall in relation to each other. It's something that I feel like I should be able to remember better, because I feel like I've gotten actively better over time. So
no, trust me, when you just start making a bunch of films, some of the older ones start to blur together. Because when I was a student, I made a ton of films in my last 2 years of college, both for other people and for me. And if you would have asked me now about those films, I would tell you one thing about one film thinking it's another film, and vice versa, because it all kind of runs into each other.
I'll tell you one thing. I just finished my first year at USC, and we had this one class that basically was making back-to-back a film every week, and all of the films would just absolutely go insane and crucify themselves over it. I mean, I'm not saying I was exempt from that, like, but people would be like, yeah, I've been up in the library for 4 days straight because I'm trying to edit my film so I can turn it in on time so I don't get graded down because I was sick last week. Anyway, so you end up making a bunch of films basically. And it's really funny because I really remember 2 of them super well. One of them is when I wrote the screenplay. For some unimaginable reason, decided not to be as involved with the other because I was like, I want to take a different role. Big mistake. This dude in my class absolutely bungled the film and added things that were improvised to my screenplay and then still credited me as having written it. And I was like, okay. And then the other one I remember really well was my final because that came out really well. And I actively had to edit for 16 hours straight though to finish it on time. And by the time I finished color grading, and it had been so long that I literally looked up at my dorm and everything just looked like it was been color graded. It was an experience. Anyways.
Well, keep in mind that you're going to be working on some films that don't come out as you wish they had because you gave it to someone else. Just move forward, go to the next project. Hopefully, your collaboration will be much more fruitful.
Every time I have to talk to him, I'm like, I wonder if he knows what he did. Like, I mean.
Well, next time you meet or face this person, just tell them that I was a little bit disappointed, but we can work through those issues.
I think I just was like, why did you do that or something like that? No, but I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem with anybody, thankfully. I think that honestly, it's been a pleasure to get to work with other people. That's kind of why I stuck this in here to an extent, because what I was going to say is part of the reason that I really wanted to make this film, Lairs, is that, to an extent, this was when I was in high school, so before I was in college, and I kind of benefited from the fact that, I live with somebody who's like a brilliant artist, by objective standards, i.e. my mom, because she is genuinely a really brilliant poet. And so it's nice to basically pick her brain about what it was that inspired the work. And when you're trying to adapt something to some extent, you have a better chance of adapting it successfully if you're in contact with the person who originally made the thing, because then you can get down to what the ethos was supposed to be of the original work, rather than just what's on the surface of I wrote this as a book effectively or as a poem effectively, because you have to restructure it to work as a film effectively. And so I think that basically gave me a deeper understanding. And there's other poems and poets who I really like, who I'm sure that if you maybe emailed them or something, they would let you use their work. But I'd rather be able to actually talk to the person. Okay. And it's because it is a great way to understand the work better, I think. Also because poetry is something that's prone to having 50 million interpretations to it and having them all be right. Like, it's nice to hear what the person who wrote it wanted it to mean, because that's a good starting point.
Well, you bring up something very very important, because I actually have not talked with many filmmakers who are or have adapted someone else's work. So that's some type of experience that you have that's different than a lot of other filmmakers. So and you got to speak and collaborate with the actual person whose work you were working with. How was that exactly? And what were some difficulties doing that?
I mean, honestly, my mom genuinely thinks that my films are good and she likes them. So, which is hard for somebody who's literally a Czech immigrant to actively have them like it and think it's good. So that's kind of a flex for me. But anyway, that does wonders for my self-esteem. But anyways, basically, I think that because that's the case, I think she finds it to an extent flattering that I want to make a film of something that she wrote, because then it's somebody else who's good at what they do saying, hey, I think what you did is really good and I want to make it into something else. And I think she's I'd say somebody who isn't overly intrusive in a process that she knows that she doesn't really know how to do. Yeah. I know that sometimes people have issues with musicians and that kind of thing when they're making a music video, thinking they know how to make a film and like actively being in massive pain. And I mean, I don't know if poets are like that, because I think poetry film is a more niche area and poets are less kind of aggressive maybe, but not all of them. I mean, Andre Breton punched somebody and that started the surrealist movement, so who knows. Anyway, sorry, I don't think my mom would do that. But I basically enjoyed the experience of getting to basically talk to somebody who was willing to basically just kind of put it all out there, like everything that was the artistic underlying points and the motivations for the work that they wrote, and then just say, but you can basically do whatever you want, because I know whatever you make is going to be beautiful. It's not going to be insulting to my poem, and also it's going to bring it to a wider audience, because a lot more people are willing to watch a movie than they are read poetry, because it's kind of something that has a more hyper intellectualized valence around it, and so people are kind of, I think, freaked out by it more, on average, whereas anybody will go see a film. So it also brings it to a different audience of people. And to that end, it makes it, live on longer and, in a more vibrant way. So I think that you can't really lose as long as you're not somebody who has a personality disordered complex about their own work, in that situation.
Well, that's good that you were able to work well with your mother, and the collaboration was fruitful, especially considering this is your second film. Or second adaptation of her work. How has the reception been for the film then? Other than your mother, because obviously she liked it, but how has the reception been? Has it played in a lot of film festivals, or is it just started?
This film has been around for a bit. This film's been around since 2020. It was a film that took a huge amount of effort. I built all the sets of this film, all the animated sets and stuff. I basically took a carpentry class, and I basically learned, it was kind of my family trade before my mom, went to college and stuff and actually became intellectually well educated. But, my grandpa and his father were both woodworkers. So something I kind of grew up, around / being told about. And I grew up knowing how to use tools and that kind of thing. And I kind of was thinking, I know how to do basic stuff, but I would really like to be able to learn how to do it properly, technically. And so I did, basically. And then I proceeded to build all the sets for the film, the miniature ones and the large ones. I built that railing. I built the table that the sink is in, which was actually pretty strenuous because I had to build this massive plywood thing that had basically ribs underneath and kind of a lip, so it would actually be able to hold something that's a really heavy sink. I got it from Omega Salvage, and I'm from San Francisco originally, and Omega Salvage is basically outside of San Francisco. It is a really great it's not really a junkyard. It's a bunch of stuff that's torn out of old houses that's actively nice, that's been, allowed to be there. It's sort of like Goodwill for sinks and railings and that kind of thing. It's really cool. But basically that's where I got that sink. I literally went there and I kind of had a sketch that I made of the kind of sink I wanted. And I was just thinking to myself, I'm just going to look around in this whole outside lot full of sinks until I find a sink that looks similar. And then I found this really great sink. And it's totally a sink that could be functional if you installed it in your house or something. And basically, I talked to my carpentry teacher, and I was like, how do you build basically a countertop that has a sink in it or something? How do you brace it so it won't break under the weight of the sink? And he asked me, he goes, "How big is the sink?" And I said, "I don't know. I can't lift it. I had to have one of my friend Sebastian, I thank him in the credits. I had to have my friend Sebastian come over and help my dad lift it into the thing, because I couldn't pick it up. I couldn't, make any headway. I couldn't move it at all. I'm not a complete weakling. I think it was just extremely heavy. And so I had to enlist 2 males to do it for me, and they were both actively struggling to do it, and both of them are over 6 feet tall and strong people. It just was really funny. So I don't actually know to this day the answer as to how much exactly that sink weighs, but I definitely built something pretty strong because it was able to support it without having any issue. So it did work, and it looks really good. And then it was really great to be able to build that whole complicated thing and then just use DaVinci to remove it and make it completely black, so people think it's computer generated and don't give me any credit. No, just kidding.
I wouldn't have.
I've had so much confusion in my films about whether the animated stuff is, real life animation or not. It's because I make it in a way where I, obviously I color grade it, I alter it afterwards because I want it to look stylistically a certain way. But then every time some person just is, overcome by the need to say, "Did you computer generate that?" when I actively hurt myself, being on the ground for 12 hours or something of my basement in the cold in the night while moving some freaky thing that I decided I needed to animate. And then, come on, man. No. This is my passive aggressive way of saying nothing in that film is computer generated, that I built it all.
Well, that just goes to just a testament to how hard you're working for your.
That's what I meant by I did everything. I literally did everything.
So how long did it take you to animate the film, or make the film and animate the film, since you were doing all of it? And oh my God, you were building stuff too. In
a way, when I made this film, the thing that was actively the most time consuming was making the sets. For example, the house set at the beginning of the film is a dollhouse that I built, and I built that whole damn dollhouse. And so that took a lot of time because you have to paint it and you have to put it together, and you have to make sure you don't do it in a way where you can see some weird little messed up detail that looks gigantic on the big screen, because I wanted it to be kind of uncanny valley, seem like an actual house. And so, but I didn't want people to be able to pinpoint necessarily exactly what it was that made it seem off until later, so that's why I basically made a dollhouse that was I think I can't remember the actual architectural type of house that dollhouse is, but I knew at the time when I got it, and it's directly modeled off of a real type of house. That's a real type of Victorian house that basically exists, and so its measurements are accurately to scale architecturally, so it actually looks really cool from the outside. Now I have these little like animals that are kind of doll-like from when I was a kid that I basically dressed in a Christmassy way and put them in there. So now it has a much more positive vibe. It's less creepy, less uncanny. But yeah, it's downstairs in my house, so I see it all the time, which I think is kind of funny.
Well, you'll use it for another film.
Yeah.
You'll redress it and you'll recolor grade it in post-production, and it'll be a completely different house, and no one will even be the wiser.
Literally. I mean, I don't think they would know. I just feel like that thing is really cool. It has potential. I spent so much time on it for it to actively be a 2-minute like attempt to animate that scene. Okay, not literally 2 minutes. It took longer than that, but still, I animated it in one go, and it was good, and it was a success. And usually that's kind of the case unless you actively mess something up in some way, because obviously animation, you're literally moving each frame, But it was just kind of funny because it was so much effort, literally months of effort to build that thing, and then it's been recorded. That's it. Put it by the dining room table, like it's done. It's just funny. I don't know. But it was to an extent. It was just so much of the film with this particular film, more so than my other films, because I think the other ones are more balanced in a way. But because I was trying to create basically expressions of these really intricate images and ideas from the film, I basically ended up putting a lot of thought into basically the artistry of what the scenes just inherently looked like initially. And some of them, there's more movement than others, and other ones kind of rely more on just like what is in the scene and how it is set up in relation to itself, and kind of what that means and what that looks like, and the way that it looks if you composite other stuff with it, or if you color grade it a certain way, or if you do actively difficult, weird tracking mask things where you make something orange or whatever the hell, all these things that are a lot of effort and take a lot of time. And I don't know, to an extent, definitely I feel like the film is just a film that even when I go back and watch it, I feel like out of my films, it's a very like detail-oriented piece in a way that I'm not actually that detail-oriented, but my mom is very detail-oriented, and so it's her poem, and so I feel like I kind of was trying to actively reflect this sort of sensibility. And I realized over time that it is my sensibility, obviously, because I made it, but it is also me trying to kind of reflect somebody else's sensibility. And I think that's one of my only films where I really tried to do that, rather than just kind of including somebody else's sensibility, which is something that I didn't get a chance to do that much, honestly, when I was, not yet at USC, but now I have a lot of chances a lot of the time to work with people who I think are really brilliant in various areas, like acting and music also too. That's one of my favorite things, because I have a bunch of friends who are really great musicians or actors who are literally just in acting or music programs at my school. And I can just be like, I want to put you in this film. Can you develop this character out? And the dude is just walking around or something like that, kind of ominously, and boom, suddenly it's like heart-wrenching or something, I mean, that was literally my final my film final. I mean, he wasn't literally just walking around, but there is a lot of, it was my friend Caleb, and there was a lot of portions of the film where he was basically just walking around South Central like in an ominous way, pretending to be like an Irish American like thug, basically, which was extremely funny, but also like really fun, because it was just fun. I mean, and I didn't get robbed for my camera in the night, so that was good.
Is that what you're thinking about? Getting robbed in the middle of the night? Oh wow!
Yeah, oh my god, this is the curse of being literally in a horrible neighborhood, but being on a campus that isn't really that big, and so you really want desperately to walk off of the campus, but you kind of can't. Anyway, USC is in like South Central LA. I mean, people say it's in downtown LA, and I don't know why they say that if it's not true.
So, if this, what year did you say you were now? Was that
I'm going into sophomore year.
Sophomore year. Okay. Sophomore year. So that means you're looking forward to doing much more complicated and bigger projects, I'm assuming.
And less gen ed classes, for the love of God, please. I'm just kidding.
Well, I could tell you this.
No, actually, I graduated like extremely high in my class in high school, so I shouldn't talk. But yeah.
Well, you decided to embark on films that, to be honest with you, most of the student filmmakers I've talked to don't usually do. They don't usually do the kind of experimental films like you've obviously gravitated towards. So it's always interesting to see your inspirations and how you go about making your films, because I've never done an experimental film. I just find them fascinating and interesting because from my perspective, an outside perspective, when I'm watching your film or watching any of their films, I'm getting a little insight into the filmmaker themselves, which is not always something I get when I watch, say, of someone doing your typical slasher film or someone who's trying to make.
Well, maybe you are getting insight.
Because you are the one creating and bringing together these images that may not necessarily work well with each other, or in this case, you use the poem, which is sometimes cryptic and not so on the nose. You have to put a little bit more of your own personality in it. So it's a little bit more fascinating for me to watch them, even if I don't always get what you're trying to make as a filmmaker.
You know, this is the thing that I think is really core to my films, which is that, I mean, I want people to be able to watch it and like not necessarily be able to explain what it meant, but just kind of get it. That's good enough. You know, I feel like a lot of people value making work that's ununderstandable to people. And a lot of people value making work that like lay people, whatever, can't understand. And it's like, no, you're actually unironically bad at making films if you can't convey your message successfully to other people, at least emotionally, like in a universal way. Like if people don't kind of feel something by the end of your film, and maybe they can't describe what that was or how they felt that way or why, because they just don't have the vocabulary to like describe that, or maybe, you know, because to an extent, you know, no one does really have the vocabulary to describe the depths of like human experience and emotion because it's so complex. Yes. But, you know, I mean, I think that, you know, I just want to make work that you don't really have to have pre-existing, you know, intellectual knowledge to understand. If you do, then you might have a way of describing it that would be more articulate to other people or something like that. But I think that something that I've been proud of in my work is that whenever I've shown it to any of my friends or anybody in my family, no matter, you know, what walk of life they're from, no matter whether or not they say they're an intellectual or whether or not they say they like art, like they always get it. You know, and I feel like that's a success. And I feel like you don't have to be able to describe why you got it to get it. It's just, you know, oh, yeah, I got that. You know, I like that. Where I didn't like it and I've been thinking about it for 4 days, which is just as good as having people like it, in my opinion. So I don't want people to feel neutrally about my work. I'd rather have them be like, I actively am being haunted and driven into psychosis by overthinking about this film and I can't sleep. Or alternately, you know, that was sick as hell. Awesome. Best film I've ever seen in my life. Like, not like, oh, I don't remember watching that. You know, that would suck.
Yeah, that would be a bad reaction to the film. I just watched it yesterday, but I don't remember anything about it. Yeah. Oh, my God. And I guarantee you, from my experience watching your films and some of our more accomplished experimental filmmakers, they always have left me with some type of weird little thing. I was like, I can't describe it, but I'm still thinking about it 2 days later.
It's like the fundamental thing that's in the film, I think, the fundamental idea. And I think sometimes even the people who make the films don't really always know how to articulate what that thing is. I always kind of go backwards and try to figure out what it was if I didn't know when I made the film. I mean, I usually think I do know when I make the films, but you know, there was a point in time when it was, you know, younger, when I kind of would just go for it before I, you know, parse that out completely. Then I would go back when I was like preparing to answer my Q&A questions, and I just analyze it heavily using psychoanalytical principles, basically, and conclude that the point of my film was X, Y, and Z. And I kind of already knew to some extent, but it was a kind of more surface level knowing, and I wanted to be able to say, no, this is the real underlying thing that you're supposed to interpret out from it. But now I kind of feel like that's kind of a circular, and I mean, I just fine. It's not a big deal. It doesn't matter really. No one else is going to know what you did first. But, you know, I think that that's kind of, for me, just too much of a circular way to think about it. And I think to an extent, I actually make a more intentional message, and that has more conscious message, like images and ideas and sound and stuff coming from me that I control and have intention with and put together in a certain way, and I'm able to like actively play with and assemble and disassemble and that kind of thing to see if it works, to the viewer. If I actually know what I'm trying to say and I'm not just kind of subconsciously riding through just as much as the viewer is, because to that extent, I think that creates kind of a tendency to have a more confused message or something like that, or confused ideas, because people have a lot of conflicting ideas and people are confusing. And if you just let the film kind of be you unmitigatedly, then it's going to be, you just kind of spilling your guts out. Like, this isn't therapy. No one I don't think is going to be as interested to see something that's just about me as they are going to be about an idea that I had, that obviously it came from me, and so it's gonna have my sensibility, but that doesn't mean that idea isn't universal. I don't really want to make a film about just me, even though I do want to make films that are definitely me in them. My work is part of me. I mean, like, it is reflective of me, and I think that it doesn't. To an extent, it's like, I don't know if you would know who I was. Sorry, I don't know what that was, but I think it might have been the chair, so my bad. But anyway, I feel like you would not be surprised, I think, to hear that I made my work. But I think that sometimes people don't know what to expect for who made my films, because people have told me that before. Like, multiple people have told me that. Multiple festival directors, they've said, "Oh, when I was watching a film, like, I didn't know if it was made by a man or a woman. I didn't know the age of the person who made it. I was really like curious to see at the end." And I always think that's really interesting, because I don't know to an extent why that is something that has been repeatedly said to me. I don't think everyone feels that way or anything, but I think that it's just interesting, because I've never had anybody say, "Oh, I was able to like actively identify your external presentation identity as a human being in literal detail for watching your film." But I think they're still able to tell something about the way that I think. I just think that the way that somebody thinks isn't something that's inherent to some specific group of people or something like that, so you can't really tell. I just think it's an interesting thing. I thought that was cool, because I felt like that's kind of a success to an extent, because it's like I took an idea I had and I made an idea that could be anybody's idea, as long as that person was just exploring it in an interesting way. So, I mean, I don't know if that's a universal response people have, again, but I just think it's kind of really cool, like that's been something people have said today. I thought it was neat.
Well, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's something that's kind of been going on, like, since like 2015 or so, since I made my film Colder Christmas, that people have been having basically that comment about my films. And I think that was like the time when I basically felt like I became a much better filmmaker, because I mean, my other films were really good, but I just had a moment of realization of how to make something that, because my film that I made, Colder Christmas, is basically a documentary about my family coming to the US. And it's an experimental film also. It's a film I made with a bunch of old Super 8 footage of my mom on her first Christmas in the US, I think, in Texas with her parents, basically. And it basically has all these weird internal contrasts that make it seem very not integrated, into United States like life and culture. But also, this house looks very like a house in the US in the inside, but the decorations are Czech, and they're kind of having the Christmas celebration on the night of, because Czech people do Christmas on Christmas Eve, and you unwrap the gifts basically just late at night. And they're all really dressed up, and my grandma has like French cuffs on, and you can tell they're not speaking English, because the silent footage, but you can tell they're not speaking English from the way their mouths are moving. But you can see that it's like obviously in America, and it's really cool. And so I really went through a huge effort to basically try to bring this nature of it out of it in a way where other people could see it, whose family it wasn't. They could see the discomfort, contrast, and like displacement, basically, and the desperation to seek basically a new life and culture without understanding it, and to build something new for yourself and like pursue the American dream. So I basically, then I interviewed my grandparents about regular day-to-day occurrences, like leading up to the point, I guess, that they were just living in the Czech Republic, then Czechoslovakia, to the day they left. So I just asked them stuff like, where did you buy your groceries when you lived in Karlovy Vary? And I didn't include my voice. So it was just stuff like, I bought my meat at this place when I lived in Karlovy Vary. And when I went to the airport, the last person I saw before I got on the plane was a secret police officer checking my passport. And, I had them say what they wore on the plane when they defected. And like, I didn't want anything sentimental. I just wanted it to be like run-of-the-mill stuff. Even the defection, I wanted to be run-of-the-mill stuff, because neither of my grandparents really had anybody, because they basically said they were going on vacation, and they told them because they didn't want to join the Communist Party or go to jail, alternately. Yeah, because my grandpa was getting pressure from it at work, and he said to me, he was like, "Bill," I said, "I was thinking about it," and I said, "I'm thinking about it. I thought about it all the way to Austria, and then I thought about it all the way to US, and I said no. It was funny. But yeah, they left to go. They basically said they were going on vacation to Austria. They just kind of dipped to this refugee camp in Austria, and they basically applied for asylum there and succeeded. And then they applied to immigrate to the U.S. And then the U.S. basically took forever to clear them because the U.S. was like, "Oh my God, you come from a communist country. We have to actively make sure that you don't have any communist connections and you're not secretly a Russian spy," which is kind of funny to me because it's like, this is just some family trying to leave the country, bro. But Canada apparently didn't have any of that. So Canada was like, "You can come here now." My grandpa was like, "I don't want to go there," which is kind of funny. But yeah.
There's nothing wrong with Canadians. Canada's perfectly fine.
I think he thought it was too socialist or something, which is really funny because it's nowhere near, the Eastern Bloc where no one had any food. Like, it's just Canada. I mean.
So I do want to ask you an important question because you're an experimental filmmaker and you have this very specific process that you use to create your films. But I wanted to see, have you, after watching people watch the reaction or watch your film and give you their reaction to your film, or if they had a different reaction than you were expecting, have you gone back to change and augment anything in the editing process to better, elaborate on what you wanted audiences to get out of your film? Or is it like, I'm leaving it alone and I'm hoping people get what I wanted to get out of it, but if not, that's okay?
I kind of have a point in time, which is kind of equivalent, I think, to when, well-known filmmakers have the kind of pre-screening of their kind of, for now, final cut to a specific just audience group, and they actively get feedback from them. And then there's usually a lot of changes made, I think, at that point, from what I've heard. I mean, I obviously wouldn't know because I have not personally made a feature-length film and had a bunch of random people come write on sticky notes about what they thought about it and then made cuts frantically before it was released, but I can understand it, like that makes sense. But anyway, I basically often have people in my life who I just think are kind of a good judge of whether or not something is good. And also, some of them are filmmakers and some of them aren't, I mean, some of them are just particular people I'm friends with who are, I think, kind of have just an interesting outlook on it. Or like, I think it's interesting what my mom has to say sometimes. I don't always agree with her, but I think sometimes she's right about stuff. And she's kind of more of a stickler for details, like I said, than I am. So sometimes I'll notice some really stupid thing. And she'll be like, "Yo, there's a fly in your animation. You should Photoshop it out." And I'm usually very grateful because I won't always notice, but I will notice on the big screen when there is a fly in my animation, which there has been before, and I did have to Photoshop it out, frame by frame. But anyway, traumatic experience. Anyways, I very much think that basically it's kind of valuable to take the feedback of other people kind of before you put the film out there to mass audiences, because then, I know people sometimes submit rough cuts to festivals and stuff, and I've done pre-screening for this film festival in Mill Valley, the Mill Valley International Film Festival, several years in a row, basically. But that's like a volunteer job because, it's a really fun thing to do, basically, and really interesting. And a lot of people send rough cuts. I don't know how common that is at film festivals, but at that festival anyway, a lot of people send rough cuts. And I always look at it and I think to myself, you need to ask somebody in your life, not me, what's making this better, because I'm not gonna, it's not perfect, and it's not perfect, which is why it's a rough cut, and that's fine. But I don't understand, like, from a personal perspective. I mean, I like seeing them. I think it's interesting, and I get why people send them, because I think they're saying, "Yo, I'm finishing this basically, and I'll have it done later. So if you think it's good, take it now." But for me, I just, I wouldn't feel at all comfortable about sending a rough cut film to people because I just don't want it to like taint their view of the final version of the film to that extent. And I think that the only people who I want to show a version of my film that I'm not 100% sure about to are people who basically just, I already know them and I kind of trust what they think. And I always keep that group kind of limited to an extent. I don't want it to be like every person I know and their dog, sees my film when it's, kind of naked, basically, like, that's basically the only way I can think of describing it that makes sense.
No, I mean, that's why I'm asking the question, because I think you're the first.
Like, yeah, though, but if somebody gives me feedback in that group, that's basically why I'm showing it to them, because I need desperately for somebody to tell me if I've done something absolutely idiotic in my film. Like, I just don't want some dude in the audience telling me that. I don't want to let it get to that point. I want it to be, at least like 99%, You know, I mean, I don't think I've ever made anything and released anything that had something in it that because people always ask this question for this was like, oh, what would you change if you could change one thing about your film? Nothing, because I literally wouldn't have let anyone see it. Like, if there was something seriously wrong with it, I would have been like, oh my God, I wasted a year on it. I'm going to now hide in a closet and cry, and then I'll be fine later. You know, I mean, I feel like if there's some irresolvable thing, I don't know what the hell I would do. I intentionally pre-plan everything so that doesn't happen. Like, that's why I don't just have a B-reel that I'm shooting with multiple cameras and that kind of thing. I never do stuff like that. Like, I understand the value in it if you're making a massive production. You know, just what if something gets screwed up and then you need more footage, and you don't want to have like editing like Bohemian Rhapsody where that supposedly didn't have enough footage and you could tell. But anyway, basically everything is timing wise, you know, including down to how many seconds the shot is, down to where the crossfades are, that kind of thing. That's like storyboarded. I came up with that. It has been weird to an extent to work in live action and to do stuff in circumstances where you're just filming without a permit and you're doing basically run and gun filming in college, you know, with your like actor friend or whatever, or you're like in Union Station and you don't really want to, you know, attract too much attention to yourself. So you kind of acknowledge that you're not going to have a tripod basically. And so in those circumstances, you kind of have to be more willing to film more seconds on each end of the shot than you would think you would ever use, and willing to acknowledge that maybe you'll end up with the things in different order, and maybe you'll end up with extra footage that you don't use, and maybe like some of it will need to be cropped in digitally and changed and stuff in a way that you didn't expect. And to that extent, it's better to just have kind of a shot list more than a storyboard, I think, in a circumstance where you basically like have to get out of there and you're not really supposed to be there. But stuff that is so animation based, which a lot of my work has been, and my kind of style of filmmaking, I think, has been based in learning how to do animation basically, even when I started making films that have live action in them. My style of filmmaking, when it's just me in charge of everything, which by the way is another reason I make experimental films, because I know I can make them really, really well and almost perfectly, basically myself. And I feel like I wouldn't want to embark on an endeavor where I would fail to do the film justice because I don't have enough people involved in it. And I think that that's why, like, in my life, I have been actively looking forward to basically meeting more people who are actively great at like all the different parts of filmmaking and really interested in it. And that this has definitely happened for me in film school, that I can work with those people on stuff because I actually like working with other people. And I mean, I'm a stubborn person, but I'm not, you know, mean or like confrontational unnecessarily or insulting people's ideas. I think that two heads are better than one. I think, you know, me and somebody else who's super talented and super interested in what they're doing are going to make a way better and more interesting film. And I can see that, you know, even in these like silly week-long projects where honestly they're pretty good, they came out really well overall, I see that happen in a lot of them. And to an extent, you know, I have this one classmate and she's a really good narrative screenplay writer, and she kind of writes screenplays that are very like literal good stories with good characters that interact with each other in a way that's really good. And basically I have worked with her like 3 times, and every time I just make some wacky ass color grade and insane animation over it that makes it just kind of a dream, like just, you know, like digital animation basically, because she was super into it the first time, and she was like, we have to work together again next time, this is so cool, you know. But anyway, and everyone in our class thought it was really sick. These films were basically the ones that excited the most, yelling and whipping and dudes being like, whoa, go so-and-so type thing, because they're cool, because it's like the marriage of two people's very different and very good styles into something new. It's like really cool. And I kind of didn't have experiences like that before I went to college so much. And this film, Lairs, is kind of one of the things I cherish because it's actually something where I like have somebody else's artistic voice present in it. And I think that's probably the first film, just looking back at all my work, where I allowed that to happen to an extent, because I've always had actors and like musicians and that kind of thing in my films, because you meet people who are actors and musicians if you just talk to people and like take theater classes and bite the bullet. Actually, I'm not a bad actor, I'm pretty good at it, so like it's not that heinous for people to see me recite a Shakespeare monologue. But I don't do it anymore that much because I think that it takes up a lot of time, and I think that I would be doing it a disservice by actively doing it and being really crappy at it. But like, I think fondly of being 12 and doing acting class and now still being friends with those same people, and they're still really talented, and I just can have them work in my films for free, which I can do with people at my school now because they're not SAG-AFTRA actors and they don't actually have any legal. No, just kidding.
They're all gonna watch.
Like, please, I'll pay you with chips. Please be my final. Like,
but speaking of future wise, because you brought up, you haven't done a feature yet, but you're in school, so that's perfectly fine. You're gonna keep making short films, I'm sure. Are you planning on sticking with the experimental films because you can have a lot more control over yourself? Are you going to actively look for more collaborators to make different types of projects, different genres? What do you
this is kind of what I think. I honestly, in my life, my ultimate goal is basically to be a producer, to run a production company. Okay. I want to basically produce my own films, and I want to produce other directors' films, and I want to basically, I have a business plan, and I mean, this is a literal government econ business. Like it all blends together. It's the same teacher who was really great classes in high school, basically. I think it was the business entrepreneurship class that I did this, and that was really stupid though, that I didn't remember that immediately. Okay, anyway, duh. But like, basically, I've had a pretty solid sort of financial plan of a kind of novel way, which I'm not going to get into it because I don't want to obviously expose it, but that's not the main point. I basically want to run a production company that in a way that is kind of not really done anymore, but through more modern means and through more, obviously decent and fair means. Basically, you have a platform to give visionary directors huge amounts of money to make insanely like big budget films that you can't really make now and that you can't have enough control over now, that were that are kind of harkening back to risk-taking works that literally were more risky in their time than they should have been even now, but they would never get made now. Like Lawrence of Arabia was the thing I always used as an example when I was talking about it to people, because it's like that film never would be made now. No one would give David Lean that much money to make a film with two unknown actors, one of whom isn't white and the other one of whom is just completely like unknown, completely, even in his own country, and literally just trust the nose of a director who's been really good in the past and who says, yo, these dudes are amazing, they're amazing actors, and then proceed to have make a film that is just a completely revolutionary take on basically a male friendship and stuff in a way that was completely not really shown at that time. And I think probably made people pretty uncomfortable, but people just kind of let him do it because he was David Lean, who's really good, and I think that that is exactly what should have happened. And it was one of the most expensive films and biggest risks for Hollywood, basically, like ever. And it also had a huge, gigantic payoff, even though it was a film that was technically a risk. And people are so afraid of making risky films now that there's no evolution in like the huge production company blockbuster Hollywood part of filmmaking. And I think that it's kind of the fact that it is the huge production company blockbuster Hollywood part of filmmaking and not just films that were expensive to make, but like it was a really good director just taking advantage of their resources to make a kind of film that you wouldn't be able to make with less money. Like Lawrence of Arabia being an epic, it's filmed in the desert in Morocco and it's beautiful, it's really beautiful, and they wouldn't have been able to do it with less money. And that film would never happen now. And David Lean would be like an independent film director who would be disgruntled and dissatisfied and probably an alcoholic or something, which I think he was anyway, but that's not the point. I could be wrong about that. I don't remember. They all blend together, like all the really good, tortured, like highly successful filmmakers, but who are still somehow tortured internally. Yeah. But anyway, but I just really like the idea of finding a way to fund this kind of like filmmaking, not literally like that kind per se, not that I mean, I would find that film is awesome, but anyway, but I'm more so things that just are really strongly focused on the artistry and strongly focused on the visuals, but also use just are made in a way that is just expansive and beautiful and extravagant, not for the purpose of just that, but for the purpose of artistry and beauty and for the purpose of making something that's amazing. And I think that to an extent I would be really happy to kind of I would like to have a situation where I can basically just kind of keep my eye out for people who I think just have something that they're presenting as a story or as a character or whatever that's really unique and nobody else could do it except for them. And I'd like to basically bring that thing that I could never create because like other people just created something really unique and amazing, and then put in like my own visual style basically, which is the thing that I realized was really great about those animated things and color grading I was doing, was my visual style, which is really appealing, I think, even in different kinds of stories and can be adapted for different kinds of stories or lack thereof of stories, and basically make these films be more impressionistic and have like interesting dream sequences and have just interesting stuff in them that just is something that really should be in films and was in a lot of classic films and kind of has gone by the wayside because things are either super literal or super strange a lot of the time. And I feel like there's this Jonas Mekas quote about poetry, film exists on a spectrum between basically, I think he said, poetics and entertainment, and you basically can fall anywhere on that spectrum, and that is this, and you can explore basically into the poetic or entertaining side, you know, et cetera, et cetera. I thought that was a really great way of describing it, because I think it is something that is equally entertaining as it is beautiful, basically, is the kind of film that I want to make. And I think equally as you know, mystifying and intellectually interesting as it is just entertaining on the base level, as it is emotionally like satisfying. So do I want to make experimental films? I mean, I think I want to make films that are just more complicated than the kind that I make now. I think that people wouldn't necessarily peg the films as experimental films, but there's a lot of films that are experimental films that were popular or are successful. Like, even I don't really think people consider David Lynch, who's obviously an experimental filmmaker, like on par with like Jan Schwankmeyer level weird. And like they don't think he's an experimental filmmaker. I mean, I don't think people think he's an experimental filmmaker. They're like, oh, horror, blood, cool movie. I mean, and it's kind of like you can hide in plain sight. Or I think Jerry Lewis's films that he directed, were a lot of them, those were very strange experimental films that were really beautiful, like The Ladies' Man or something. That's not a narrative, typical narrative. It is a narrative, but it's not a typical narrative. It has a lot of weird stuff in it. That set is like something that is experimental inherently, because it, you know, was the first set that was built that way. It pioneered an idea of set building that wasn't realistic, that was dreamlike. That was a big like dollhouse with an open front, basically. And the color scheme is really, it's kind of something that's like typical for that time, to the extent that it's like I think color scheme that basically defined the color scheme that was typical for that time. But you know, it's a comedy. It's a dude falling over on himself like a cartoon, so people don't think it's an experimental film either, because they like it. I mean, that's the thing. That's the thing with David Lynch, in my opinion, too. People don't think it's experimental because they just like it. So they're not going to label it as like weird art movie, you know? I think they're just going to be like, that was really cool and strange and bizarre. And I think to that extent, I think a film that is more willing to like go into the, you know, poetic and the entertaining equally is a more complete film. And that's kind of the way that I think. And also, you know, my family is Czech, you know, there's a tradition of really strange filmmaking and storytelling in Czech, and a lot of Slovakian also literature. But there's this kind of, I think most American people would call it magical realism, to be honest, but you don't really call it that in Czech or in the Czech Republic whatsoever. When there's just some weird thing in a story, it's kind of almost mythological, to the extent that it is kind of just expected to be part of most stories, because you're kind of thinking, well, this is like, it's you know, when you have these Greek myths, there's things in them that would never literally be able to exist, but they still feel like they're stories about actual people. And to an extent, more modern Czech literature has a nature to it that's like that. And there's also a lot of really strong and rich culture of just strange fairy tales and mythology that were basically written out by a group of famous Czech poets and writers, and they were published into this book that was the band under communism, because it's too nationalistic. So, but yeah, my grandparents have it anyway, which is cool. But basically, it's like this huge tome of just these absolutely like horrifyingly bizarre, complex mythologies that like literally, I don't think some of them made it over the border into Germany, and so there's a German version of them too that's different, but most of them don't really reflect the kinds of stuff that you see in other cultures, because they're really complex and strange and bizarre. And so I think that there's kind of this historical tradition of basically magical stuff. It's kind of included in all narratives, or it could be included in all narratives and be kind of accepted being there, and not be magical realism. It's just, oh yeah, there's Jan getting potatoes from the basement. Oh my God, there's a flying cat attacking him. Okay, cool. I don't know. It's just, I mean, that's kind of ridiculous, but you know, it's just kind of stuff. It's when reality is suspended, then it's kind of all suspended to some extent. So why not make it more interesting? Why not just put something in there that means something else, that is real, even if the thing itself isn't real? And that's how you end up with, you know, it's like, it's just symbolism, basically. It's like slash magical realism. Magical realism, I think, is a super literal description of literal symbolism in a story. Like, I mean, it's such a like interestingly American idea, because I mean, I do feel, obviously I'm American, but I just feel very informed by a lot of the stuff that my family basically brought me up with around film and around ideas about basically art and books and myths and like fairy tales and that kind of thing. And that's all very Czech. And so whenever people describe stuff as magical realism that's from Central or Eastern Europe, after they watch it, it's really funny to me, because I'm just like, bro, that's just a movie. I don't know what to say to you. Like, it's just funny. Well, it's not, I'm not knocking people. It's just like, obviously, I think that it is technically really, it is magical realism. Actually, it's literally like a direct descriptor of what it is. It's just kind of like, that's kind of not the thing you expect in an American film or something like that. You don't expect something strange to happen necessarily, unless you're kind of mentally prepped for it because you are watching a really weird filmmaker who always does weird stuff in their films, and you're like, okay, this is gonna be something weird. Like,
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing some more of that magical realism in your films.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think to an extent, I think that has my main point of what I was trying to say, but I didn't even actually say it, was that I feel like that kind of has influenced my work a lot, and I feel like it will continue to influence it going forward. And then that way, I feel like I can use those ideas to kind of make like a more unique and creative kind of basically story that maybe could be kind of more just because maybe people like it and they'll stop considering it experimental, but it still will be. That's kind of what I'm saying.
Well, I will.
But it wouldn't be like the films I make now because they're kind of a one man band version of like something that is supposed to literally have a crew of a bunch of people on it, you know, because one person can only physically and mentally do so much without actually ending up, you know, in a, I don't know, mental institution or something. Like, who was that French filmmaker who was making that 6-hour-long film? And he made like, he was making like 3 films at once. No, sorry, he made a 6-hour-long film or something, but he was making 3 films at once, and he was holding all the information in his mind, and he just had a mental breakdown and got committed, and he forgot all of them because of the trauma and had to like write a new film.
Hopefully,
this is embarrassing, but yeah.
Sorry, you just talked to me for an hour, and I did not realize that. So we're gonna have to cut it short. But as usual, it's always a pleasure to talk to you about your films, and
thank you.
I am looking forward to the next one because it seems like you're just getting started here. You're a student filmmaker. You're getting all this. You're soaking in all this knowledge of all these different filmmakers, these different filmmaking styles. You're experimenting and adding a little magical realism in there. And so I am going to be looking forward to your next film, and I'm hoping that our audiences this weekend get a chance to see Lairs and seek out the other films that you've done. So please, I look forward to the next film you do, and like this time, when we screen your next film, because we will, we have to continue our conversation on exactly what you're doing next, okay?
Yeah.
All right, so Emma, thank you for joining us with Something Wicked Film Festival at 2022, and I wish you nothing but the best. Okay, so have a good day.
Thank you so much. And it's always really great to talk to you too. It was extremely entertaining. I have this horrible thing that I do where I just start talking about something for like 4 minutes, and I think that I'm being super intelligent, and I hope that people want to listen to me talk about it, and then I forget what I was talking about. So I kept forgetting what the question had been. But I feel like I was like, how did I get here? This is not my beautiful house. This is a bad Talking Heads reference. I'm sorry, very embarrassing. Thank you.
All right, have a good day.
Thank you. It was nice to talk to you. Thanks for having me on.